Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, Helping Young Children Manage Their Emotions. Thank you all for taking the time out to join us today. My name's Rita and I also would like to introduce you to Lisa, and we're both consultants. The webinar today is brought to us by KidsMatter, and KidsMatter is funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue. Early Childhood Australia is partnering with Beyond Blue, and in the school context, Headspace is partnering with Beyond Blue to support whole services, early childhood services and schools to implement the KidsMatter framework and to undertake the professional learning that goes along with it. So I have a question. Is your service, early childhood service or school, registered and participating in KidsMatter? If you'd like to find out more, please take a look at the link in the chat. And if you are participating, a participating service, the good news is that all these webinars will support your progression through the professional learning. And we have a whole series of webinars coming up over in the next coming months. So feel free to ask any questions about participation, about growing healthy minds and wellbeing in chat as well. So now let's get back to the topic for today, helping young children manage their emotions. And I'd like to start by acknowledging traditional owners of country. So today I'm sitting on Gadigal land in Sydney. And Lisa, where are you?
I'm on Whadjuk Noongar country in Perth.
Lovely, great. Oops. We've just gone to the wrong slide. Okay, so I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners of country and their continuing connection to land and community, and also pay my respect to elders past, present and future, and to all those who continue to hold the memories, traditions and ways of being for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We recognise the importance of the continued connection to culture, country and community for the health, social and emotional wellbeing of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. So you might want to pop in chat what country you're sitting on today, and because I know you're participating from all over Australia. So today also, as we talk about the strategies to support young children to manage their emotions, I'd like you to keep in mind the history and traditions of the thousands of years that have gone before us, and to draw on this wisdom, the wisdom of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who use land, connection to place, culture and ancestors to understand and regulate emotions. So we're covering quite a bit of interesting material today, but before we go into that material, I'd like to just talk about taking care of ourselves. On our screen, you can see the ways for today. So we're talking about early childhood mental health and wellbeing, and sometimes that can trigger difficult emotions in some of us. We've all had different sorts of childhoods, and so sometimes that can bring up some difficult memories. So it's important to be aware of what we're feeling and what comes up for us when we talk about early childhood mental health and managing emotions in childhood. So we need to take care of ourselves if those difficult emotions arise. So make sure you have a bit of a plan. If there's something that comes to mind, you can talk to a friend, a colleague, a family member, or you can also get professional help. It's important that we know how to get professional help for ourselves, because if we're confident in doing that, we will be much more confident in supporting children and families to get professional help. And if you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health difficulty or emergency, you can contact Lifeline on 131114. So have a yarn with someone who can help you, and make sure you take care of yourself during this webinar. We'll also be sharing through chat, so make sure you only share what you feel comfortable in sharing. And a reminder that there are no wrong questions. And we also ask people that when they respond to another person's question or reflection, do so with care, empathy and respect. Children learn from what the adults around them do. So when we're aware of how we look after ourselves and support each other, it can make a huge difference to the wellbeing of our team and of the children in our care. children in our care build up a picture of who they are by watching how we react and behave and how we interact with them and with others around us. So self-care is a critical part of supporting children's mental health and well-being. So have a yarn if you have some difficulties. So we're going to move into a poll in just a moment to find out what concerns you most about managing children's, supporting children's emotions. So we've all had an emotional history in our childhood, and we can all relate to different feelings in different ways. So let's pop up the poll now. And the question for the poll is, what concerns you most about supporting children to manage their emotions? So let's see what people are responding to. So straight away, we've got not knowing what to do.
Knowing how to respond to strong emotions.
That's right, Lisa. Do you want to say something about that?
Look, you know, children having strong emotions can be overwhelming and a big part of our day. So really, really the winner at the moment in the first initial hit of the poll.
Absolutely, and that goes back to what I was saying about our own history of feelings, you know, in different families, and we'll unpack this a little bit more as we go, but in our own families too, you know, maybe anger wasn't an acceptable feeling, maybe sadness wasn't an acceptable feeling, maybe happiness wasn't a really acceptable feeling. And so if we grow up in those different contexts and we see that emotion in another person, that'll often bring up discomfort in ourselves. So knowing how to respond and hold a safe space for children having very strong emotions, yeah, it's probably, in this poll, it's the 72% are saying that. It's a big challenge. And all the rest are pretty much the same, not knowing what to do, talking to children about their emotions, that balance of being a friend and the adult in charge, keeping all the children safe and knowing how to allocate time fairly, and not having enough training. That all, they're all sort of in around the 20% mark. I think the second highest is not knowing what to do. When we talk about knowing how to allocate time fairly, I'm always reminded of that saying that being fair is not giving everyone the same thing. Being fair is giving everyone what they need. So that perspective can help us to understand how to allocate time and understand that it may be fair to give one child a lot of time and another child who doesn't need that much time won't be allocated that much time. So thanks everyone. We'll close that poll now, and so we sort of know. So the main question is, how do I respond to strong emotions? So I think you're in the right webinar for that, I think I'm handing over to Lisa. That's right. I'm going to hand over to Lisa now, and she's going to tell us how we're going to find out what we should do when we're responding to children's strong emotions. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Look, we're all at different stages in our professional lives. So some of the information we cover today, you may be new to you, or it may not be. We hope that your participation in this webinar, though, will assist you to, these are our learning outcomes for today, to understand why emotions are so significant in children's development, mental health, wellbeing and learning, understanding emotions, appreciate in what ways brain research has provided evidence for effective practice, know what strategies to support young children to positively manage their emotions. And we encourage you to use the chat box, as Rita has said, to share your stories, ask questions, make comments, and we look forward to your contribution during the webinar. We're going to look at brain development to start off with, and one effective way to understand the significance of emotions is to look at how the brain works. Dr. Jan Siegel is one of a number of people who has done extensive work in this area over the past decade, and we've referenced one of his books, The Whole Brain Child, in the chat. He talks about imagining the brain as having an upstairs and a downstairs. The downstairs brain developed earlier and controls many of the functions that keep us alive, like breathing, heart rate, sleep. There is also where the flight, fight, freeze response comes from, and response is seen when people feel threatened. The upstairs brain develops later on and controls thinking, reasoning, executive functioning, play, body control, and managing and regulating behaviour and emotions, which requires access to the upstairs brain. The emotional brain sits in the middle, but it is found in other areas of the brain. And many people, we do talk about left and right hemispheres of the brain too. So the left brain carries out all that logical, the literal language functions, while the right brain interprets the meaning of the left brain information, which is reading body language, our facial expressions, voice tone, and emotion. So emotional brain is right in the centre, right. Centre right, yeah. So you often hear of the logical left brain and the emotional right brain. Memories are held in various areas of the brain. Dan Siegel says that the brain is constantly trying to link upstairs, downstairs, left and right, and memory. Areas in the brain are connected vertically, horizontally, diagonally, and as the emotional brain is situated centrally, all connections pass through here. Imagine the emotional brain as being like a filter for incoming and outgoing information. For example, an event can impact on both upstairs and downstairs brain. So it can affect both your breathing and your thinking. If you have an unconscious negative memory of dogs and a dog runs towards you, you may hold your breath, freeze, and temporarily lose access to problem solve and your thinking brain upstairs. For a young child, the more stressful the event, the greater impact it has on their brain. So chemicals like oxytocin, which is released when we're calm, cortisol, which is released when we're stressed, either help or hinder these connections. Chemicals are activated in the brain by experiences people have, and this either strengthens or weakens connections. The most important experience is close relationships, and the chemicals released through positive and negative experiences, including relationships, will determine how well these connections work together. Connections between left brain and right allows people to express emotion in a way that is seen as appropriate. If this does not occur, it could result in an interesting society where people are either flooded with huge emotions or show no emotion at all. This can also impact on the way a child's temperament influences their life. The aim is to be able to use all areas of the brain, and this is especially important when managing and regulating emotions. It is really helpful to use the growing knowledge around how the brain works to guide people, but particularly with young children. Just looking, okay. Rita.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a lot of information to take in, and I really recommend that people have a further look at Dan Siegel's work on the brain. So we'll be referring back to that image that we saw, the upstairs, downstairs, left and right brain, a couple of times through the webinar. So it's a great foundation for what we're going to be talking about next. So Forrester and Albrecht's book, Social and Emotional Skills for Life, indicates that educators are noticing an increase in difficult and challenging behaviours in young children. So tell us about your experience in that. Is that happening for you? I certainly have noticed that working with early childhood services, that many educators are saying that they either have many more children with difficulties in their room, or that the difficulties that they're seeing in children are much more extreme than something they may have noticed, say, 10 or 15 years ago. And educators are also saying that the skills and strategies that they might have used before, the techniques they've used earlier, don't seem to be working as well. And so it'd be good to see if that's your case as well. So you're probably attending and listening today because you have concerns around challenging behaviour, and managing it is something that you're interested in learning more about. And you might be aware of how inextricably linked emotions are and behaviour. In the past, in our culture, we've sort of tried to separate feelings and thinking, and feelings and behaviour, but all the brain research is showing us that feelings and behaviour are totally connected together. So exploring managing emotions is actually going to impact on our capacity to support a child in their behaviour. You could see on the previous slide the significance of emotions and how all areas of our brains and our lives are influenced by how we feel. Feelings can either help or hinder our learning. When we're feeling something very strong and stressful, it actually switches off the thinking part of the brain. However, we can't learn without a little bit of emotion in there. The brain science is telling us that in positive learning situations, we also do need to be emotionally engaged. So emotions are a part of all our learning experiences. They colour how we feel and think about ourselves, how we think about the world, and how we think about people around us. So educators are responding, we as educators are responding to the emotions of children many, many times during the day. So the next slide is going to show us a little bit more about how where emotions fit in our world. So we probably all know that research has clarified that children's social emotional learning is linked to good mental health. And early childhood, positive mental health in early childhood is the foundation for good mental health and well-being for the rest of our lives. So this graphic, I love this graphic. It gives us a really simple but very powerful way to look at a child, the whole child. And remember, it is just a model. This isn't the actual child. It's much more complicated than that. But it gives us a good framework to work from. So it shows us the interconnectedness of three elements around emotions and well-being: the child's sense of self, the child's emotional skills, and the child's emotional skills. In fact, this graphic applies to all of us. So each of these elements have their own characteristics, but they're all closely connected. And I wanted to talk about behaviours, and we've sort of mentioned this a bit earlier. And I wanted to talk about behaviours, and we've sort of mentioned this a bit earlier. So behaviours that we refer to as appropriate or inappropriate depend very much on the social and cultural context of the children and the families that they come from. So children vary in the ways they express their feelings. And as I said before earlier, you know, children who come from a family where expressing your feelings is very acceptable will be more emotionally expressive, and their behaviours may be more expressive as well. And children who come from families or cultures where being a little bit more indrawn and contained is what's acceptable will tend to be more like that. So, so the children will vary in the way they manage their emotions, and this is due to their experiences in their families, the child themselves, their values, attitudes and beliefs, and differences in the child's temperament. The children learn different ways of expressing their emotions based on what is regarded as normal within their families and cultures. And the differences in these expressions will also, in how families and cultures relate to emotions, will influence the way children learn to regulate their feelings. So let me just unpack this graphic a little bit more. So that sense of self, that's about thinking about who we are, and that can be very strong in a child, can be very confident. A child can be very confident, have a strong sense of self, but not have very good social and emotional skills. The emotional skills, that's about regulating our feelings, and that's what we're going to be unpacking even more for the rest of the webinar. And the social skills, they're actually the skills of interacting with those outside of ourselves. So a child could be strong in all three areas, in 2 out of those 3 areas, in 1 out of those 3 areas, or a child may not be strong in any of those areas. And this is a really good way to actually look at what a child's doing and what they might need. We have another webinar in the series, webinar 4, and it's called Children's Behaviour and Our Interactions. And this webinar looks at our interactions and relationships with children and how that influences behaviour. And you might want to look at that recording, and there'll be some information about that in the chat. So on to the next part of our webinar. And back to Lisa.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. Just looking in the chat as well, that people are commenting on in their services at the moment, in their kindies, and that there is a lot of challenging behaviours in our work. And look, I think, so there's some really big emotions, and there's a bit of discussion around why that might be the case. We do live in a different society. Obviously, we've got some really experienced educators that are watching a change in our services and in our sector too, with children changing. I don't have any comments on anything you can read in the chat there, Rita?
Yeah, so I can see a lot of scenarios about backgrounds of children and families, and you know, why children might be feeling big emotions and expressing that in behaviour that may not be helpful to them and those around them. So I'm really happy that this next part that we're going to look at now is going to help us understand what to do with those feelings that are arising out of those very challenging family situations.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we've shared a story with you today about educator Jane. Please remember, I hope you've had time to read it. If not, have a quick read of it now. Please remember that this record is an everyday actions of an educator, and she was really generous for us to be able to share her story with us and for us to discuss it. And all of us in our work and parenting have already used a lot of strategies to help manage children's emotions. Oh yeah, be calm, be present, coming through on the chat. I'm reading the chat as I'm just going through what we're coming to. Keep sharing your thoughts, please, about that. But in the story, we do see, we read about, an educator assisting a distressed child. As you were reading it, did you reflect on what you regularly do and how effective are your actions? Thinking now and putting yourself in the role of this educator, and consider what you would do and what would happen. How does your knowledge, understanding and belief influence your response and your actions? Really food for thought, I think, and identify the actions of the educator that did help this child manage her emotions, and use the chat if you wish to share what you did notice. What does the educator do to help this child manage their emotions? Yeah, deep breathing, relaxing, that's a good strategy. Yeah. But in the scenario, the educator does talk about breathing and breathes with the child. Acknowledge the child's emotions. Yeah, the educator does offer her time, support and space. Thank you, Sarah. We waited for the child to respond and gave her time to calm down while staying close. The educator really slowed down the interaction and settled the child first before moving forward and asking the child if they needed and wanted to talk about the incident. It was lovely to read. It is a lovely read. Knowledge feeling. Well, thank you for your contribution in the chat today, everyone. Yeah, definitely Jane's calm demeanour affected the child. Or fantastic responses. Thank you. Look, there are 4 areas we would like to highlight from the interactions of the story that you've read, and some of them are coming through on the chat that are supported by research, though, and as particularly helpful. Belief, strengths and understanding, connecting, emotional literacy, and telling the story. The child's behaviour is the only thing that we do know about reading from the story. It's the only information we is given. However, but given the educator's actions, we can assume that she has used behaviour to interpret, think about and wonder what had happened socially and emotionally for the child, for Jane. She also realised how Jane's sense of self was being influenced by this and took immediate action to provide support for the distressed child. This is an example of many times during the day that everyday educators working with young children, we have to stop, think and reflect on knowledge and belief, and then we have to take appropriate action. And then we give the child time to meet us and do the same. The stop, act, so the stop, reflect, act approach reminds us how important it is that educators have knowledge in their heads and give them a framework for action. There was no time to check the book. Kate had to act straight away to support Jane. Her knowledge of Jane supported her actions, staying with Jane until she stayed calm or calmed down, and she was able to tell her story. It is clear in the story too that Kate had time to be with Jane, which actually meant that her colleagues had picked up any slack, so to speak, and were with the rest of the children. When educators are consistent in their approach to supporting young children manage their emotions and help each other do this, it greatly benefits the child. Your comments in the chat support what we took from the story. Oh, sorry. The story in the chat. Sorry, in the chat. There's going to be a link to the Stop, Reflect, Act poster and Stop, Reflect, Act video link. Your comments in the chat that you've taken away from the story have given us clues about the educator's self-belief system, attitudes, thoughts, feelings and skills, and they've all influenced her relationship and her interactions with Jane. She assumed that this behaviour had a cause or was communicating something rather than thinking the child would get over it. Behaviour is an expression of need. She prioritised this moment with Jane rather than just ignoring the child to calm down herself. She separated the child from the behaviour rather than thinking of her as the child as just simply whinging. She was comfortable about physically and emotionally comforting the child. She obviously knew and could tune into the child and knew gently to persist until the child accepted her comfort. She knew about emotional literacy and she knew to wait until the child calmed down before talking about the problem. And she also made sure the story of what happened to the child was told. She accepted the child and the child's feelings, but most importantly, she actually acknowledged them. She helped develop the child's emotional literacy by helping Jane recognise, name and express emotions. She knew how to stay calm herself, and that came through strongly in the chat, that she remained calm and that was able to calm the child and did not show any evidence that Jane's behaviour pressed her buttons. She was bigger, she was stronger, she was wiser and she was kind in her work. Rita is going to talk now about connecting. Oh no, I'm going to talk about connecting. That's okay, we've been fiddling with our slides, thanks for bearing with us. So why is connecting so important? We could see Kate, the educator, was really persisting in her effort to comfort Jane. This child's behavioural reaction and the background knowledge the educator had indicated that whatever was happening was really important to this child. Jane's downstairs brain was clearly dominant. She looked like she was stuck, or it read like she was stuck and unable to think or make decisions. Initially, it did seem that she just couldn't move, but the educator at this moment just wanted to comfort her and wasn't really thinking about brain research at all. Kate bobbed down to her level and asked permission to help. She talked to her and validated and labelled her possible emotion of being sad and stroked her back. She was respectful of the child's inability to accept comfort early on, but she stayed with her until she was able to accept the comfort. Jane responded to the educator's closeness, tone of voice, calm state, and was allowed time for the child to process. And the educator was stayed with her and was just being with her until she was ready. They connected both physically and emotionally, the educator and the child. Cuddles activated that oxytocin chemical and reduced the effects of the stress and distress of the child. You know how much better you feel when you get a hug when you're feeling distressed. Did you sense that Jane trusted the educator and that they had a positive relationship? Kate was really in tune with Jane and her emotional needs. She followed the child's lead throughout the whole interaction. It's really important to connect in a way that the child knows that you get it and that you understand that feeling or emotion that the child's experiencing. Kate did exactly that, and when she validated and labelled Jane's emotions, she followed her lead and told her that she understood what was happening for her. Once that connection was made, a bridge from the downstairs to the upstairs left brain was starting being built. Jane will then be able to use logic to make sense of what is happening and her emotional and use all areas of the brain in an integrated way. And Siegel helps us to remember this with the phrase, connect, then redirect. It's interesting, there's something coming to the chat. It was really clear that the child and Jane and Kate had a relationship and connection. Rita, emotional literacy.
So point number 3, so we're looking at 4 points that support the educator to support the child. We've talked about the educator's belief, strengths and understanding, and we've talked about connecting. So we're going to talk now a little bit about emotional literacy. And the word literacy we usually think of in terms of being able to read and write. So emotional literacy is very similar to being able to actually recognise our emotions in the same way as in ordinary literacy, we recognise words, so it's about being able to recognise our emotions and to read them and to actually, in a way, write them, to manage them, to express them. Emotional literacy is a critical area of supporting children in managing their emotions and therefore their behaviour. Daniel Goleman, who's a pioneer in the area of emotional intelligence, tells us that to be able to manage or regulate our emotions, we need to do three main things. We need to be able to recognise that we're feeling something. We need to be able to label that emotion and to understand that emotion. The fact is that we can't regulate something that we're not aware of. So we saw in the scenario how the educator Kate assisted Jane to calm down and manage her emotions by using emotional literacy. So she used emotional language that Jane would understand. And so words like, you look like you're feeling sad, you're upset, they were all words that helped Jane understand what she was feeling. So with those, and research tells us that when we hear the names of our feelings, the feelings actually very naturally start to regulate. You know, if you're upset and someone says, oh, I can see you're really upset, all of a sudden you start to feel a little bit better because you feel seen and heard. And so naming feelings is a really critical part of emotional literacy, and giving children the names of feelings is a critical part for their emotional literacy. As Dan Siegel says, name it to tame it. So in the beginning of the interaction, it was all about feelings and emotions. And then when the words to those feelings were given, then Jane was able to calm down and begin to use her thinking brain. When we're filled with emotions, as we said earlier, and we saw in that brain diagram, that when we're full of emotion, we actually can't access our thinking brain. When our emotions have calmed down, that's when we can access our thinking brain and start thinking about what we want to do about the emotions that have been going on in it. So developing emotional literacy adds to Jane's left brain, and this has helps her support her right brain. The cuddling that the educator does actually releases a chemical called oxytocin, and that also helps to grow the connections throughout the brain, including connections from the left to the right and the upstairs and the downstairs. So emotional literacy and, as Jane's emotional literacy and language development occurs, she'll be able to better and better start to use that sort of language that Kate was using for herself. She'll be able to say, oh, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm happy, whatever that feeling is, and then she'll be able to work out what she wants to do with those emotions and which behaviour she can use to express those emotions in a way that doesn't damage her or others around her. So that's emotional literacy. Is about recognising, expressing and managing our emotions. And we're going to, the next part of responding to these huge feelings is telling the story. So I'm sure that everyone knows that if you have some great exciting thing happening in your life or an absolute disaster happening in your life, the first thing that you want to do is call a friend and talk about it. Tell them, hey, I've won $20,000 in the lottery, or call a friend and say, hey, I ran into, I crashed my car and it's going to cost me a lot of money to repair. So telling the story is the way we regulate our feelings and make sense of what's going on. Telling the story is the way we put our emotional experience or our emotional response to the experience that we've had in the world into some sort of bigger context so we can actually understand it. So telling the story, Dan Siegel says, helps you make sense of what happened. And telling the story can only happen once the child is calm and relaxed. And you can see that once Jane was settled, she could tell her story quite easily. But until she was settled, even though Kate asked her what was wrong, she couldn't say anything. She was still in the middle of that experience. It was as if it was still happening to her and she was still crying about it. But once she did calm and could tell the story, then she pretty much immediately stopped crying and could focus on the next part of the day. So telling the story is like a bit like resolving the issue and bringing it all together. And once it's sorted, you can move on. It's important to remember that mental health issues in adults can often be traced to these unresolved challenges of young children. And the evidence does show us when children can tell people, safe adults, about their emotional experiences, as an adult they are have much better mental health and well-being. So let's talk a little bit more about feelings and emotions by going to another poll. And the question of this poll will be, which of these emotions are you most likely to speak with, children about? And so we talked earlier about our own personal history of emotions and acceptable and unacceptable emotions, and sometimes that actually colours how supportive we can or can't be with children's emotional life. So for some of us, maybe seeing children really upset or really angry or frustrated may actually trigger those feelings in us and make us very uncomfortable. And so in terms of working with emotions with children, we want to be very clear about our own state of being and our own strengths. And once again, when you're with a child who's having big emotions and you feel like you're not coping, get help from another educator. And it's okay not to feel comfortable with every single feeling. We are only human ourselves. So let's pop the poll up and see which of the emotions that you're most likely to be talking about with the children in your room or in your service. And so we've got happy, sad, angry, frustrated, scared, proud, excited. But are there any other emotions that you're talking about your children? If you do a Google search or an internet search and put in list of emotions, you'll see there's 20, 30, 40 or 50 emotions, words describing different feelings. And yet we do tend to sort of stick with a happy, sad, angry, and if we're very good, get to frustrated or proud. So it'd be lovely to see some other feelings in chat, emotions popping up in chat. I can see jealousy is one of them. So what else have we got here? So angry is a big one. Happy, sad, angry. You see, that's our big three. So I'm going to send out a challenge to everyone who's listening to this webinar, is go and find out the names of another 5 or 6 or 7 feelings and start using that feelings language again with the children and giving them those other feelings as well.
We've got overwhelmed. We've got some people having a go at thinking of other emotions.
Right.
Yeah, exclusion. One, restless.
Being left, I feel left out. Yes. Yeah, kind. Lonely is another one. Yep. Nervous. Great. Confused. Disappointed. You are. You can write all those down while you're sitting there. We've got an extra list here. There's other possibilities also. We could be feeling guilty or cheeky or jealous. We could be bored. I think someone already said overwhelmed. Excited we've got up here. Surprised, grumpy. Oh, grumpy is one of my favourite words. When I'm not really angry, but I'm sort of not being a very nice person, I can say to my family, I'm feeling a bit grumpy right now, so just give me some time out. And I think someone already said anxious in the chat, disappointed. Yeah, great. Lisa, do you have anything in further comments to add to our chat about?
You're going to make me go Google emotions now, Rita. So I love the other words. Just as I read them, I feel them. They're such powerful words, aren't they? Our emotional words. And we also talk at my family about hangry, which is hungry, angry, which is different to grumpy. There's so many different variations of emotions. So that's detached to a group. Yeah. So there was also exclusion came up too, which is an interesting one. No, but this is all fantastic, and I really do take on that challenge, Rita, of adding some more words to my repertoire of emotions when I'm talking with children.
Fabulous.
And that's it. So yeah, thank you.
So we've been talking about which of these emotions that you're likely to speak about, And so Lisa's going to unpack this a little bit more and talk about adults as emotional coaches. Do you know you were an emotional coach?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? And so far we have talked about understanding emotions and their significance. And we've also had an example of what it looks like in practice. But now we're going to really have a bit of a reflection and think about our role as adults in supporting young children to manage their emotions. We can have a look at the diagram, the slide that is just up in front of us. It's on screen. It's by Carolyn Webster Stratton. If you look along the left-hand side, it's the left-hand side lists and indicates the action from a child who's unable to manage their feelings, and their behaviour is described as an automatic reflex to the feeling the child is experiencing. Let's look on the right side, more reflective, and that indicates where we would like the child to be, able to manage their emotions. How are we going to do this? Strategies. What strategies can we use? And today we also will give you some top tips as to how to support this, and that's in the next slide. But let's now have a little think about our role as adults. Learning how to manage emotions is both caught and taught. I really like that saying. Really makes me reflect. The children's ability to manage their emotions is dependent on many things, including maturity, temperament, and general development, family social environment, and the environment. Educators' emphasis on its emotional education. I know before in the environment. And the environment, educators' emphasis on its emotional education. I know before in the chat people say they'd like to do more of this sort of professional learning on emotions and regulating of emotions. And so most of you will be aware that temperament of a child they are born with does play a significant role and part in their emotional development. There is much research and literature out there that our babies are born with a distinct temperament, which affects how they respond emotionally and behaviourally to external events. And the role of the adult is to have the knowledge, the understanding to help that child or help the children in our care, and to make the most of their inherited capacities and to accept whatever that temperament is, their inherited temperament is. Hereditary does define and may define, temperament, but experiences that the children have shape it. How you respond to a child's temperament-driven behaviours can reinforce or produce change. While educators cannot change maturation, cannot change temperament and family influence, we do have a major effect and impact on children's ability to learn to manage their emotions and responses. We do this through modelling and intentional teaching. Learning how to manage emotions is both caught and taught, and that's the saying that we've said before. I really like it. We also take time to think about adults as emotional coaches. In our field of work, we have to be experts in many areas, but emotional coaches is definitely one of them. And if we think of ourselves in this way, it is very helpful because I think it helps us. What is an effective coach? What do they do? It brings mind to action, tuning into an individual, connecting to their internal state, reading a child's signals, being encouraging. This is all what coaches do. This is what we do. Give empathetic feedback, understand the individual, the child's development and where they are, and match expectations to that knowledge, providing models, and giving support as required, and until it's no longer required, just like the educator in the story that we read about. As educators, we do work closely also with parents. So we have the opportunity to assist them in understanding. A baby initially is totally dependent on the adult, and then obviously as they grow up and they start moving through developmental stages, so we're working towards self-management. How successful this journey will depend upon the adult and how well the adults have supported and coached the child along the way. When we are faced with challenges that the emotional behaviour of the young child can bring, it is tempting to look for quick fixes and one size fits all. Barbara Kaiser, in her book, Challenging Behaviour in Young Children, and the details are up in the chat, stresses that we'll only be able to assist the child when we accept that our approach has to be tailored to fit every child's individual need and be based on careful, thoughtful observation and empathetic interaction. The more challenging a child's behaviour is, the more we do have to look for those underlying needs. We've already talked about the things adults can do to support children managing their emotions, And we know that there's a range of evidence-based strategies, and these include belief, knowledge, and attitudes on the part of the educator, and also giving attention to positive feelings rather than negative feelings, acknowledge individual development differences in the child's ability to regulate emotions, using games. What games and activities do you use in your daily practice to help children understand their emotions and understand their feelings, limits and opportunities, and also what might the child be thinking? Some observations. Take some time to do some observations. Rita, top tips coming up. Have you got anything else you'd like to say about observation or what I've just covered?
Oh, yeah, Lisa, when you said talking about positive feelings, and it was what I noticed in the poll is that you know, angry came up really strongly straight away. And in thinking about it now, also one of the things that brain research shows us is that we actually lay the brain pathways for negative or, you know, challenging experiences much more quickly, because those were the things that kept us safe. You know, when the tiger was running towards us, we didn't have time to look at how beautiful it was, because otherwise we'd be dead. And positive experiences take a lot longer to get laid down in the brain. So it is actually really critically important to teach also the children a whole range of words and emotion words about positive experiences, about positive feelings, rather than just I'm happy, you know, like. So that was the thing that stood out in what you presented just now, is that critical importance of teaching children and ourselves as adults to use more positive language. So we're in the last quarter of our webinar, and there's been a lot of information that has been offered, so you might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. But what we're going to do now with the rest of the time that we're together is just really look at, you know, the key points, the top tips, that in ways that we can support social and emotional wellbeing for children. So the 3 top tips I'm going to unpack now in the next few minutes is about being with, about talking about emotions, and about organising emotions. And we've already talked about those a bit, so this is a review, and hopefully at the end of this webinar you're going to come away with a bit of an action plan. Knowledge and learning is only useful when we start to put it into practice, and it's a critically important part of the whole learning cycle. So top tip number 1 is being with. So helping children manage their emotions, the key to all of that is about being with. It's about relationship. And Maria, if we can have the next slide, that would be great. So being with is a term that comes from the circle of security, and that's something you might want to follow up as well. And it's a little bit more complex than it sounds. So being with is grounded in the fact that babies are born to be in relationships. They absolutely need to have a carer who will comfort, protect, and interact with them. And this is supported by what we know about the brain. All the latest brain research shows us that babies are born to be in relationships, because it's relationships that develop the healthy brain. In fact, if you see a scan of a 3-year-old child who suffered severe neglect compared to a child who's had the right sort of positive relationships in their life, you'll see the child who suffered neglect will actually have a brain that's 25% smaller than the brain of the child who's grown in those healthy relationships. So relationships actually build the physical brain. And so without relationships, babies can't grow into mentally and physically healthy adults. So the key words here, which also I believe come from Dan Siegel, is connect and then redirect. So we're talking here about top tip number 1, relationships and connection. So relationships, what does that involve? You know, to say be in relationship. And it involves the adult who is bigger, stronger, wiser and kind. And just for me, even hearing those words, bigger, stronger, wiser and kind, when I know that's what I need to be, that actually sets me up to feel quite strong and grounded to hold the space in which the child is having that feeling. Kate's actions in Jane's story showed that she was bigger, stronger, wiser and kind. She knew what was best and she took charge so that Jane felt safe and secure. And Jane could accept the comfort and responded by calming down. And she could accept the comfort because she knew that Kate could hold that feeling with her. Kate was tuned into Jane's needs by comforting her and then followed her lead until she was ready to explore the world again. So Kate showed Jane that she was emotionally available for her when needed. She didn't say, I'll come back when you've calmed down. Often I've heard that educators mistakenly think that they should leave a child alone to settle, whether they're angry or upset or crying. And actually, no, you need to actually be with the child, even if they don't want you around. As in the scenario, at first Jane didn't respond to Kate, and so Kate just patted her on the back. But then later, when Jane was ready, she could turn and accept that cuddle. So when any child is feeling a huge emotion, be there for them. And sometimes being there for them might actually mean sitting a few feet away and just watching them and saying, I'm here for you, I can see you're upset, I'm here for you when you need me. So this is really critical. So imagine if something like time out had been used for Jane, or if she wasn't even noticed, it wasn't even noticed that she was upset. So we talk about, instead of talking about time out now, we talk about time in, and then we connect and redirect. If something goes wrong with your relationship with the child, it's important to reconnect as soon as possible so you can reestablish that relationship. So top tip number 1 is being with. And so let's move to top tip number 2. So talking about emotions, so that's a little bit more complicated than just giving children, you know, an emotional dictionary. So we can see quite a few ways that we can talk about emotions in our sorry, my screen just went blank, but it's all right, I've got my notes there back again. There's quite a few ways we can talk about emotions with children. So the first step is to just name it, to tame it. If someone's upset, say, I see you're upset. If someone's happy, you can say, I can see you're happy. Very, very simple stuff. And you can also talk about your own feelings. We're people too. Us educators are people too. We have feelings too. And it's okay to say to a child, oh, I'm feeling a bit grumpy today, or I'm happy today, or whatever it is that you're feeling. It's not okay to act out your feelings on others, but it is okay to tell others how you're feeling so they know how to respond to you. And I'm sure you've all had the experience with children who are incredibly forgiving. If you tell them you're not feeling great one day, they usually come up and give you some sort of a hug or do something nice for you. So talking about emotions is also about telling the story about feelings. But I think I'm going to say something about that a little bit later. Before I do that, I want to talk about early warning signs. So often a child is feeling an emotion as a physical sensation in their body, but they don't know the name for it. And so it's good for us to also help children work out what the early warning signs are of different feelings. You know, if I'm having a difficult feeling, I might start to sweat, I might have sweaty palms or the feeling of butterflies in my tummy, I might be feeling nervous or running to the toilet or wobbly legs, that sort of thing. So unpacking how these different feelings actually affect our body. How does it feel when you're scared? How does it feel in your body when you're angry? What's the look on your face? What's the sensation inside? How does it feel when you're happy? These are all also really important things to unpack with children, because then it helps them when they have that physical sensation. They can also go, oh, that might mean that I'm feeling X, and that's going to help them to be able to name their feelings if they know actually how that feeling might physically feel in their body. And another way of supporting, as talking about emotions, is to actually tell the story of what you see is happening. So descriptive commenting is an effective coaching strategy. So basically it's really simple. It's about sitting down with a child or with a group of children and making a little story about what you see. Oh, so you might be at the sandpit watching Mary and Tom playing together. And you might then say, oh, I can see Mary digging in the sand right now, and Tom's watching Mary. And Tom's showing Mary the bucket. It looks like he's giving Mary the bucket. I think Mary's smiling. I think she looks like she might be feeling happy that Tom's letting her have a turn of the bucket. So giving that sort of a commentary on an interaction that children are having with each other, or that a child is just having by themselves, helps to give a little bit of distance. And we talked about organising emotions, or are we going to talk about that? We're going to talk about that next. So great segue. So giving that story about what's happening gives the child a little bit of distance from what's happening, gives them the language of what's happening, and helps them to be able to organise their feelings, which is what we're going to talk about next. And gee, we're just about out of time. So I needed someone to tap me on the shoulder. So organising emotions is our third top tip. I'm going to take about a minute and a half on this just to let my co-presenter know where we're up to. So organising our emotions is about taking a little bit of distance. And you can see on this particular slide, there's a number of ways that we can organise how we feel. Mindfulness is in the centre of it. Mindfulness is about regulating our breathing, telling the story of what's happening, maybe becoming aware of our body. Learning to self-soothe is another way of organising our emotions. Knowing what I need to self-soothe. I think many of us have seen that glitter jar that a lot of services are now using, and that as you shake the glitter jar up and as you watch the glitter settle, so you can actually feel your emotions settling. Learning to wait is really important for children. Practicing patience. What am I going to do while I'm waiting? I'm going to sing a song to myself. I'm going to chat with my friend. I'm going to do something else. We talked about being aware of how we're feeling, but two really key things to help us organise our emotions are physical activity, getting out there and running, jumping, hopping, skipping. If you're a grown-up, chopping wood or going for a walk or vacuuming the whole house, really helps to settle emotions and to give us a little bit of distance from what we're feeling. And play. Play is one of the critical ways that children help to organise their emotions, because they can play out all those different emotions and practice them with their peers. And if you're engaged with their play, you can help them with that as well. So that's our three top tips. And so I'll hand over now to Lisa to finish up for us.
Thanks, Rita. Look, just before, as we're wrapping up, just keeping in mind that being emotionally literate is critical for all of us, and it's possibly as important as other literacies. I think that's a big takeaway for me. We can't underestimate the importance of connecting to help children, adults manage their emotions. We need to listen to others with our whole body and mind and look at the world through the eyes of the other person and then talk about it. Helping children manage their emotions is one of the most important skills we can teach them. Knowing positive ways to manage emotions and impacts all areas of our life and children's lives. Can you tell us in the chat quickly before we go how you move forward? You can just pop in the chat as we go through the final slides in the presentation. Share what you're going to take away. And looking at these symbols. There are many ways for us to support children. Be, feel, think and do. And these symbols are nice snapshot reminders. as many of you know, these webinars are really good and really great ways to not only learn and reflect on your own practice, but also put learning into action. And they also assist in demonstrating our individual commitment to continued professional development. So thank you for coming along. But have you heard also that, if you want to have some more professional learning in this area, you can contact our team. We can assist you. For anyone that's already a participating school or service, simply contact your consultant. If your school or service isn't a registered participating service, you can simply fill in a short online form and get started. What have you learned and acted on after this event will be all you need to finish one of our professional learning topics. Join a check-in, talk about what you've learned and what you've done. So remember, through our check-ins, and they're not check-ups, they often they're just professional conversations, and it's a great way for you to meet and work with a consultant. Please remember, before you leave this webinar, to complete the exit survey. It'll soon be put up. You need to include all the names of the people that watched with you so they can get a certificate too. That's really important if you want a certificate. Thanks everyone for attending. I'd also like to acknowledge team members behind the scenes that have been supporting and working that you haven't actually seen on screen, Maria and Kira. Yara, thank you so much. And thank you, Rita.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks everyone for participating.